could be said that we've begun to explore the mysteries that are revealed to us when we arrive at that place that once seemed to us to be a void, an abyss, a dark place where the mind would not dare to go. There's another Jewish story that enables a question to be asked. And it's that story about a great rabbi called Rabbi Israel. Rabbi Israel lived in Poland many years ago. But there was one occasion on the eve of the Sabbath day when Rabbi Israel, who was revered far and wide because of his compassion, his love, and the seeming miracles that he could perform, gathered with a great number of his followers to prepare for the blessed Sabbath day. And all those who were gathered around Rabbi Israel were uplifted by his presence. But it seemed that on this occasion, Rabbi Israel was somewhat distracted. And after some little while, everyone was surprised to see Rabbi Israel smiling broadly and laughing heartily. 3 times he burst out into laughter that rang around the room and far abroad. No one dared to ask him why he was laughing, and the evening proceeded as usual with the prayers and contemplation that were the preparation for the blessed Sabbath day. But the next day, after the Sabbath celebrations had been made, Rabbi Israel said to all his followers, "Now I know you are wondering why last evening I laughed. Let me show you." And so it was that wagons were brought and the horses were hitched, and all his followers climbed into the wagons, and it seemed in a trice that they had flown a great distance and arrived at a very small hamlet, a very, very small village, far, far away from the city in which they resided. Now, when they arrived at the village, all were learned, because the word got around very fast, that the great Rabbi Israel had arrived in their village, in their town. And of course, it was a poor place, and none of the villagers would have been able to go and visit the rabbi in the city in which he lived. So a great gathering took place. All the people of the village gathered around with Rabbi Israel and his followers. And Rabbi Israel, standing amidst the throng, looked around and he said, "Where is Mendel, the bookbinder?" Now everyone was surprised, because Mendel was a very poor, humble, quiet man. But immediately a messenger was sent to Mendel's house to call him to the gathering, and it was found because of his simplicity and his feeling of unworthiness that he had not come together with all the others. But when Mendel came into the midst in which Rabbi Israel presided, Rabbi Israel said to Mendel, "Mendel, tell us the story of your Sabbath Eve." Now Mendel was at first dumbstruck. He could hardly open his mouth to speak. But suddenly the story arose, and he began, "I and my wife are very, very poor. I'm a simple bookbinder, and because the village is populated with so many in our situation, very few come to have books bound. So my wife and I often sit down to an empty table, and came the evening of the Sabbath, and I said to my wife with tears in my eyes, 'Dear wife, I have not a ruble to bring to enable us to buy the necessities for celebrating the eve of our Sabbath. We are poor people, but we are proud. So I ask you, please do not go to our neighbors to ask for charity. Just boil some pots of water on the stove so that people will see smoke coming out of our chimney and believe that we are preparing for the Sabbath Eve." And then, tells Mendel, I left to go to the synagogue to pray. After the prayers were finished, everyone left hastily to return to their homes so that they could celebrate with the wine and food that is that which is used to celebrate this Eve. But I had no reason to return home to an empty table, so I lingered along the way. But when I came to my house and opened the door, what greeted me was the smell of the kugels, the meat that was cooking, the wine that was on the table, the candles lit. I believed that my wife had succumbed to the temptation to go to our neighbors to ask for charity, and I was angry. But I kept my peace and said the prayers over the food and wine before we ate and celebrated. But after our meal, I chastened my wife and said, how could you lower yourself to go to our neighbors to beg? And she said, oh husband, I did not go against your wishes, but when you left to go to the synagogue, knowing that there was nothing for me to prepare for our celebrations, I began to clean our house. I cleaned every nook and cranny, so everything glistened and gleamed, the floors polished. And then I moved to the cupboards and the drawers, and when I opened our wardrobe, there I found the coat that you had worn at our wedding day, given by my father. And on that coat there were 3 silver buttons. So I took the buttons to the jeweler, and he gave me a little money with which I was able to buy the wine and food for our feasting. With that, tells Mendel, I grabbed my wife and I lifted her up, and we danced. We danced around the kitchen. We danced in the living room. We danced in the chambers. We danced in the dining room. And we loved. We loved with joy. 3 times I lifted up my wife, and we danced and loved. And so said Rabbi Israel to all his followers and those who were there, now you know why I loved on the eve of our Sabbath. So the question that arises from this story is, why did Rabbi Israel love? What is it that's beginning to be revealed to each of us, having entered that space that was once dark, forbidding to the mind, and now the mind becoming accustomed is having revealed to it the wonders that are there for us when we cease all striving, all desiring. What would you say did Rabbi Israel say? This is why I love. What is it that's emerging for us? Our eyes, not only our human eyes and the other senses, grow accustomed to what was before a dark and forbidding place, in the mind now free from fear, can translate what is being revealed. Why did Rabbi Israel